In the room this morning is C.T. Muga, Eric Latif, and Nduoko. Will be joined shortly by our guest host, Nerima Wako-Ojiwa. She is a CEO of Siasa Place. We'll be talking about the place of youth in leadership. The leaders of tomorrow, what are they doing today? But first, let's begin with today's proverb from C.T. Muga.
This proverb comes from Egypt. Do a good deed and throw it into the sea.
Lose it.
Let it float away. Let it not be something that...
Don't hold on to a good deed that you've done.
Well, usually what that means is you anticipate that some good deed may come back your way as a result of your good deed. You're saying, leave it.
Let it go.
Just do the good deed.
All right. Kenyanizing it is tenda wema nenda zako.
And focus on the nenda zako.
That more importantly, right?
Yes, exactly.
More importantly, nenda zako. So before we get our guest host to come in, we are talking about youth and leadership. And, we started this conversation a bit earlier where we were saying it's always said that the youth are the future leaders of tomorrow. And it's usually put in those words. Future leaders and tomorrow must appear in this phrase.
That phrase, unfortunately, is often related to politicians. And they repeat it so often, you actually begin to think that there's some truth to it.
You're saying there's no truth?
No, I'm saying the truth is much broader than it would seem or it would sound. You see, when a politician says you'll be the leader of tomorrow, what then one may assume is that leadership has to do with politicking. And yet, leadership, you don't need to grow up to be a leader. No. People become prefects when they're in standard 1, even nursery school. That's leadership. Even if it isn't a school setting and you're playing football with your mates, somebody will be captain. That's leadership.
Yep.
I think there already is, I'm sure, but there needs to be an emphasis on understanding what leadership actually entails.
So it's about definition of leadership.
Definition and giving it context. Yes, because there are leaders in every sphere. Like the guest we're having today is a leader. The guest we'll have after this is also a leader.
Yep.
Yes, these are leaders. And when they talk about groupings, the moment you talk about a grouping, groupings will have somebody who will sort of speaks on behalf of that group. That is a leader. And they aren't the only ones. There'll be others who have. So long as somebody has a function that is a representative of others, you are in a position of leadership.
I think also that every time you talk about tomorrow and the future, then it kind of gives kind of like a comfort zone, because then you're in the thinking. It's like, all right, I don't have to do anything until now. But to understand that in whatever sphere of life that you find yourself in, you actually can be a leader. You can lead. But that means that you don't have to wait until tomorrow for that to happen. There are certain things that can take place today. There are certain things that you can do as individuals that will groom you or even your surroundings to take on that position of leadership. There are certain things that you can get involved in now. So there's really that tomorrow, to me, oftentimes is a crutch, because I heard it. I've been hearing it. This tomorrow, it seems like it would never come. Or this future is a place whereby very few people will ever visit, and the future just never does arrive.
I guess the other misconception is by the youth hearing this, they expect to be handed over that mantle of leadership.
Yeah.
So, you're sitting
when
there
we're
wondering,
done, we'll give it to you.
So when is this that I'm going to be a leader? So it's like you're waiting to be told to be, bestowed upon a leadership or for the prophet to come.
And inform you.
And anoint you with oil and say, now, from this day henceforth, Nduoko, you are now the king or the queen. No. It just basically means that I think if you look at it from the context of what is it that your parents are telling you or your elders are telling you, then they're telling you that brace yourself for the responsibility that's coming your way. Because in a few years' time, you will have the responsibility of this entire nation that we have. So it's upon you to grow up knowing that you have something to do, to contribute. You have some expectations from the society.
It actually starts with looking after yourself.
Yeah.
That as you grow up, part of the reason why you anticipate to go through an education system or some training is so that you can earn your own keep. That's where the leadership begins. You cannot talk about looking after other people if you can't look after yourself, can you? So it starts with you being able to actually look after yourself well.
Yep.
then that's a good testimony of your ability to look after others, because it is clear you have shown it in your own life that you're able to. But if your own life is in shambles, utter confusion, and you want to convince others that you are able to help lead their lives, nah.
You're going to have to do a
That
little
isn't
bit
going
more
to
of a
add up.
convincing
Nobody's going to
job.
entrust their livelihoods with you.
No, they will
And this
not.
is it. Even if you look back at the traditional way of the customary way of doing things, those rites of passage were graduating into the next level, where a lot more is expected of you.
responsibility.
Of responsibility, right?
Yes.
So you're a warrior. There's some responsibility that comes with it, and based on how you perform as a warrior in this age group, it also means that when you now become an elder, there's going to be more responsibility, and there's something that they'll be expecting you to do as, the next leader, as an elder. So it's basically just that graduation. It's not that there's a time when we'll come and we'll say, oh, now we now have new fresh of leaders, and the older fresh of leaders are going to sit back. No, they simply just graduate. You become warriors. I become an elder.
It doesn't mean that leadership stops on certain levels.
Yeah.
And I do, unfortunately, this is the thing, and we keep, if we go back to that tomorrow, it's not a time that you wait for, essentially. It's something that you do, and I actually think that phrase should be changed. To now is the time for leadership. It's not about tomorrow. It's not about the future, because the future is here. It's now. It's here. The future that we've been talking about for the last 20 or so years is here with us now. The people who were entrusted this leadership role or leadership position, guess what? There are people coming behind who are ready to take it on.
But
So
remember,
what
Ndu,
what would you give up?
there is space for tomorrow, because you may have the sort of abilities that make it possible for you to take on ably the responsibility of other people's lives, but you don't apply yourself. In such a case, that tomorrow will apply, because you aren't doing it now, but you're able to. So that tomorrow will apply to such individuals.
Take the chances. Take your chances now.
Yes.
Now let's introduce our guest for the next couple of hours, Nerima Wako-Ojiwa. Good morning, and thank you very much for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Karibu sana. Traffic is bad.
Yeah, I
Kenyan
underestimated. I thought it would be a lot smoother, but things look like they're getting back to some normal.
Look like they're getting back to some normal.
Some normal.
Where
I
have
wouldn't
you
say
been? Welcome to
totally.
Jerusalem.
She's probably new to Jerusalem.
I think so.
Wow.
Yes. Okay.
Nerima is the CEO of Siasa Place, and she is also, a political analyst. She is a youth leader, and that's what we're saying. Leadership is not about tomorrow, but anyway, we'll be discussing about that, and we're asking our question this morning: what are tomorrow's leaders doing today? Yeah. So start by first of all telling us what Siasa Place is all about.
Siasa Place is an NGO founded in 2015. We focus on educating young people on the constitution, governance processes, inclusion, and we mainly look at policies that touch on young people. So we work a lot with government, civil society, youth groups as well. But I think the importance of understanding what we're about is why we called ourselves Siasa. And it's because we felt that Siasa is normally given a negative connotation. Specifically, politicians just come to young people when they want your vote, and that's it. You don't see them again for the next 5 years. And a lot of times we educate young people that politics is actually everyday living. What your representative is doing, you understanding accountability, social accountability, considering that this constitution gives a lot of direct power to the public. Young people do not understand that or the processes that exist. So that's what we do in a nutshell. We are very active on social media. So on Twitter, we have engagements every week, including one today on police brutality and protecting young children. And then tomorrow we'll have one probably on mental health. So we normally educate young people on the policies that exist in the country and what we can do to plug in avenues that are normally often ignored.
Just so we're on the same page, when you say young people, who are we
Yes.
talking about?
35 and below. 35 and below.
Is there a threshold below? Below is
Below
Yes.
to what?
0,
To 0?
1, 2, 3.
No. For me, my organization is 35 to 15. That's the age that we focus on.
Okay.
So teens, young adults.
You said you work with the government.
Yes.
How?
In partnership.
Yes. Explain the partnership, please.
A lot of county governments, I would say as of now, like for instance with Kericho County government, we work with MCAs because MCAs are their direct representative. And a lot of times young people would know who their MCA in their ward is, know where that individual lives, because that's one of them. A lot of them are young. About 1,000 MCAs right now are below the age of 35. So we work with them in terms of looking at particular bills, amendments, policies, understanding what the issues are. When they have public fora for public participation, we normally also engage youth groups to support local MCAs, ward administrators. And I think that I say we work with government because a lot of times when people hear of me or see the work that I do, they instantly think that I'm an activist. Yes, I am. But it's also to say that it's not that we do not criticize government. We do. Even International Youth Day is coming up. It's in August 12th. We're working with the national government in supporting them for International Youth Day events in August with the Office of the President. So it's not that we always bash our government and protest.
But you do bash them from time to time.
When they do the wrong thing and when they do the right thing, we support
it's
them
necessary.
and we acknowledge them. Yeah. And criticism is good.
Yep.
What you do sounds to me remarkable.
Thank you.
How do you measure the effectiveness of these initiatives that you have?
I think for us, the impact is the growth of youth groups. There's a bit of a shift because we're moving from, I think I was listening to you guys talking about Saba last week, and even the fact that we had several young people arrested on that day. And there was an argument that those young people don't understand what the essence of democracy or participation is. But then now when we look at youth organizing, it's not necessarily institutional organizing. It's not registering an organization, which many have turned into that. People joined parties. A lot of activists back then, including Governor Kibwana, was an activist, and we can go on and on. And now they've created these mechanisms that look very official and institutionalized. So right now, young people are organizing in terms of movements, and I think very fluid. And I think also there's this mix between an online and offline action, which you cannot necessarily plug into an entity. And I feel that a lot of people are having, especially when we're talking about older institutions, donor organizations, bigger entities, are having a harder time understanding that new form.
Or engaging.
Yeah.
What is that difference between movement and institution? Because you clearly seem to have drawn a line. There
There is a line.
institutions and there is movement.
Absolutely, because right now, if you were to ask social justice centers, something else that's growing, they will say that they are movement. But then that's because the leadership is organic. That's because they also don't necessarily believe in having paperwork reporting an office. All of us are part of this because it's ingrained in our community. And so there's that sense of ownership.
How exactly
and
is it
belonging.
ingrained in your community?
And maybe I can ask a question that would be related to that, Nerima. If we're looking at young people specifically and the people that you've come in contact with, do people feel or understand their place in all of this, or are they going with the winds of change? And I'll ask this: if we look at the major movements that happened in the world, we look at the hippie movement in the 70s, majority of the people went along with the times. Look at the Black Panther movement in the United States. A lot of people went along with it because it sounded like the cool thing to do without understanding the fundamental issues of the movement. If we look at the Arab Spring, majority led by young people in the Arab countries, North Africa. Again, a lot of people went with it because it sounded like something that they should be part of. Do we have here a fundamental understanding of young people's place in a movement for things like social justice and things like economic good and growth, is there a fundamental understanding of the importance of why of this?
Yes, there is. And social justice networks are beginning those conversations. Every Tuesday, they meet and talk about different activists around Africa that have made specific changes and understanding what the influence of that change is. But they're small. These are pockets. Right now, there are only 16 that exist in our country. Majority of them are in urban slum areas. Now, when you talk about the majority population, 75% being below the age of 35, you will see that as a drop in the ocean. So I think that the more we continue to see that our country is growing, we talk about the youth bulge, we talk about the demographic dividend, and we begin to see we really need to think about what our future will look like. We are very many, and if our governance is not good governance, then we're the ones who are going to have a problem with it. This leadership is not going to live more than 2 decades. And so I think that's where we're beginning to see initiatives such as mine or youth-serving organizations coming together. And there's even a network that was formed last year of youth-serving organizations that are specifically focusing on how can young people use their energy, their momentum, and be educated on the history of even democracy or social justice.
I'm going to assume that some of the groups that you work with then share some synonymity, right? So what would you say, I mean, across groups or even across individuals, what is the general thinking of today's leadership? Let's just take Kenya as an example.
Access to dignity. I would say all of us, whether we're in ICT, business, agriculture, for me, governance, all of us want young people to have the dignity of living in this country. There's a lot of systemic changes that are happening that I don't think we realize. One, I can talk about even the Universities Amendment Act of 2016. Duale bill that people call. And so when the president assented it, it just meant that university students couldn't directly vote for their leadership. So you might think, what does that have to do with anything? It has to do with everything, because the fact that even our very political leadership had their interaction with politics or the beginning of their political life on campus, and then you take that away from an entire generation. That basically means that you're preparing them to understand that there's a leadership that's selected. And that's why I say that this even playing around with a referendum, don't joke with it, because it's already been practiced in the university settings. And I can go further, because even when we look at the National Youth Council, they've been working on amending it, where there's been debate whether they can remove the elections. Now, that's for young people who are not in institutions. That's for young people who are not in formal education, to be able to represent their young representative in this council that is the State Department youth voice of the country. So when they're removing that as well, then that means they're not only removing it from a class of young people, they're removing it from the entire nation. And so that's why I feel that there are a lot more challenges than just what do young people want? What are you up to? There are actually systems being put in place to keep them marginalized and also so completely diversified. And even when we look at young people not being devolved, youth is not devolved, but youth are everywhere. But then if you go to one county, the youth office is in another department, and you'll ask me, what does that have to do with anything? It has to do with everything. If I can't go to one office for my issues, when I have a problem, I'm completely confused as to where to go. A lot of young people complain about being frustrated and worn out when they just want to apply or, do something. Then why would I do anything? A lot of them stop.
Well, it also talks about, a county government not having direct and clear programs on the youth, on what they are doing for the youth. If it's jumbled up all over. It's mixed up youth plus something else. In one county, it's youth and environment.
Yes.
Another one, it's youth and
business,
and
ICT.
business and ICT. Then it becomes all completely mixed up. But I want to come back to these small pockets of youth engaging at various levels, and you're calling them, for example, the social justice networks. Are you saying that these just spring up out of nowhere? Are they just ad hoc, or are they organized?
I believe they're a combination of both. Not just spring up anywhere. I think that when there is an issue that occurs, like for the instance, I was talking about Mathare with police brutality, then you will see an uprising of people wanting to join something, to do something about that. And those entities exist. So we are also seeing where there's a bit of a generational, I'll talk about it about an intergenerational exchange. And that's also something that's lacking, because we have individuals who understand the history of this country, but then you don't necessarily find it in our textbooks or in our education systems. But then we also know that culturally, because I also wrote about this in my column last week, how culturally we are individuals or people that love stories and music. But then when you look at the art industry or music industry in our country, it's completely underfunded. And even when we talk about the family setting or going to the village, and these are stories that would be told by your grandmother and aunties like that, there's now that breakdown where we're not transferring. So I feel there was a sense of responsibility that was passed down. And I feel that there's been a breakdown of that sense of responsibility, where even when you have young people also becoming parents or teenage moms, and you have cases of families where they are constantly working to survive, then it becomes less about building family and values.
This situation that you describe so ably, is it new?
No. I don't believe that it is, but I think that how it's transferred is what's new.
Remember, we're in the 21st century, and one of the things that this country is perhaps clearly known for and we achieve consistently is a population increase. So, given that we're a growing population as a country, what you describe, or what you've been describing, is likely to increase. The disparities you describe, likely to increase, but does it only affect the youth?
I think that it will affect majority of the youth.
It will affect the majority because they are greater in number.
Yes.
Not because they're being discriminated against.
They are. Because right now, if you were to ask a young person what their main problem is, they would say the economy.
And you think it's a problem for only young people, or is it a problem for the nation as a whole?
It's a nationwide problem, maybe, but also if more than 75% of that population comprises this particular demographic, then now that's why we're talking about that particular. Let's come back to that conversation. We're on 96.7 in Eldoret, Nyeri 90.9, and Malindi 97.7, and are also streaming on KTN Home as well as our digital platforms, KTN Standard. No, this is spicefm.co.ke on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, as well as www.spicefm.co.ke. In the room is Eric Latif, Nduoko, CT Muga, and our guest host for today is Nerima Wako-Ojiwa. She is the CEO of Siasa Place. Before we went into the break, CT, you were saying, well, all these things that Nerima, you're saying that the youth are facing, everybody is facing them. And you were to respond to that.
I was. And I'll say, yes, everybody's facing, but I also mentioned that young people are the majority. And the fact that we're also dealing with other dynamics, including climate change, including access to water, lack thereof, water rationing, power rationing. There are many other challenges that, even right now, we can talk about this pandemic, that perhaps when you are that age, you would not deal with. Or even access to food. The fact that bread costs.
Giving me I'm not a good example to give. Because maybe in my youth, we didn't have a problem with power outages. Power outages presume that you are
that is
electricity, okay?
Oh, okay, I was talking about water.
Yes, you're presuming that one has running water.
No, even the river, even the toxics
When I was
in
a
our
young person,
pesticides.
rivers did not have those problems.
But they do now.
Right now, they do. The point I was trying to make was not to diminish the effect that what we have right now is having on young people. I was merely trying to say this. One, there's a whole group of young people who are still dependent on their parents and people who are older. And these older people face the very same things that you are saying. So of necessity, those who are younger will also face these problems. That's number one. Number two, I am also saying that because you are young, because when one is young, put it that way, your worldview is actually influenced by that, your youthfulness. You see it in one way, and somebody who is much, much older would actually see it differently. It doesn't diminish the effect it has on you. No, it doesn't. But the reality is this. If you take this argument even further back to an earlier point in the previous century, then you would find that young people had their work cut out for them. And if you transpose that into modern times, you would say these people were being introduced into slave labor. Because what you did was you woke up, you're the person who woke up the earliest, you're the one who made sure that there was water, that cows were milked, and then you went to the farm. Okay? Because most of our people lived in an agrarian setup.
Not to forget, you took care of your siblings.
Yes, you
And
did.
there were quite a litany of them.
Still doing that,
Right.
though.
That's
Yes.
still happening.
It's still happening, yeah.
It's still going
Yeah.
on in the same with the same kind of effect
Yeah.
to this current generation. The issue though is like you said, so the youth are the majority, comprising over 75%. 2/3 of the country is basically people below 35, right? So the what I heard you intimating is that the minority are making decisions for the majority. So there are very many decisions that are being made by the minority, that is people who are above 35, that are impacting directly on those that are below 35, and they don't have the kind of worldview that the majority of the population has. So for example, right now, talking about engagements by organizations that would support the kind of youth movements that are springing up. And because they only know one way of dealing with an organization is talk to the leader of this organization. Now they're wondering, so how do we engage with you? The other measures that you're talking about, like breaking up and breaking apart youth engagement in elections at the university level, in elections at the National Youth Council. But all that, these are things that require the youth then to stand up and start taking up the mantle now. Which brings up to our today's conversation is, what is it that those leaders of tomorrow are doing today to prepare themselves to take up the mantle tomorrow?
Because a time will come when they will also be in positions. Remember, it's not all of them, just a few. Even right now, we've never had such a big representation of youth in decision-making positions within even government than we've ever had. Now, what is it that is being done to prepare you for that particular role? Because knowing that you represent a very large constituency.
Like I said, as much as we have, as you've mentioned, some of the youngest parliament actually right now, it doesn't mean that they have influence. And I'm not saying that there's any country that we can look to that has done that. Because if we even look at the population of Africa...
Actually we can, but carry on.
But if we were to look at the population of Africa in terms of leadership in representatives, they are not... More than 50% being below the age of 35 is not existent.
Yeah.
But then when we talk about the majority population in each African country, more than 60% being young people is true.
So
It's
the
fact.
majority are being led by the minority.
Yes, it is. But my argument is that those who are leading understand the majority. I'm not saying that they have to be 35 and below to be able to understand the majority population. And that's why I even talked about an intergenerational linkage. And that's what we don't have in this country. The challenges that we have, the fact that we're now talking about mental health, where we can say 20 years ago, mental health, you'd be told that is a white person's disease. You cannot talk about that here. It's not part of our culture.
Witchcraft.
Yeah,
yes.
it's witchcraft. And so right now we're having conversations where young people are suicidal and talking about depression, and mental health is being considered an issue, and there's a bill being pushed in parliament. So those are some of the changes that I'm talking about that we need to recognize. And a lot of times there's so many traditional and cultural views that are mainly held by the older generation. And those are some of the things that are creating obstacles and stumbling blocks.
How do you propose to change something like this? Because the beliefs that people carry are a byproduct of tradition and culture in a lot of cases. So this is the way in which they were raised, right? The way in which they were brought up to believe certain things and then also to act in a certain manner. How do you divorce the two and say, all right, times have changed? Because that's the truth. A young person growing up 20 years ago and a young person in today's world, totally different. So many dynamics that have forced that change. Where do we even want to start? From social media to new media all over. It's not the same world that these people were being brought up in. So how do we divorce the two and say that the people who are in leadership, who grew up with a different mindset, are now governing those who are in a different space today? How can that work?
I don't think it's possible to divorce. It's also the debate of whether the state and the church can truly divorce. And that's also back to tradition, culture, and beliefs. I think that we do need to have better relationships with generations. We do not have that. And that's why I even talked about the instance of mentorship. That's gone. It's very interesting to hear stories of politicians today who had mentors. Now, it's very difficult for me to even say I have a mentor.
Why?
And because it's not considered a thing to do. It's
you don't
not,
look in the pool and see
It's not
anybody that you would like to
structured
mentor.
No,
you.
it's not structured. Yeah.
But how exactly would you like this mentorship to actually take place? Because if you ask me, my mind goes back. Politicians are always mentoring people.
How?
Well, it can.
Youth winger, campaign
You
manager.
have understood it. I was going to start with Goon Squad. Okay. Then graduated further
to campaign manager.
No, send around. There's a difference. Send around. Then they're hang-arounds. Okay. These people actually learn from the politician. Believe me, they are mentored in ways you couldn't think of. Call it informal learning, but they learn. And they understand. Some may even be drivers, but they learn. And because of the proximity to the so-called elected leader, they see what this person does firsthand. That's mentorship.
It brings you actually to a point where I wanted to ask. You mentioned that we have over 1,000 MCAs around the country who are below 35. Do they have any association to a sitting member of parliament or sitting senator or governor?
Yes.
There's your mentorship.
Yes.
And we're talking about close to about 1,500 MCAs around the country. So if 1,000 are below 35, that means that we have a lot of youth who are participating in a very, very crucial part and organ of this country.
And they are organizing.
And this is the county assembly.
Yes, and they call themselves KYMCA, where they are now Kenya Young Members of County Assembly.
Right.
It's not to say that they're not doing anything at all, which goes back to answering your previous question. What are the leaders of today doing?
So what are they doing as KYMCA?
Yes, that's KYMCA, there's KYDA,
Where the
there's
problem
Y.
arises
So-
with mentorship, unless you're actually very strong and you're very driven, you are likely to simply regurgitate what your mentor did. So you'll find someone who may be even political leadership, because this is what I was referring to, and had a mentor. The likelihood of them doing something very different is scant. They are more likely to do what they saw their mentor doing. So you may have youthful, very, very youthful leaders by virtue of their age, but they do not think like what you may want. Their thought process is not revolutionary at all.
Yeah.
It's pedantic and it is repetitive of what, and that's why.
They are molded by their mentors.
Yes,
so
and that's why you have this situation so that this quagmire we never seem to get out of. Yes. Because all you have, like you'll find many MCAs, if you look at the processes that they went through, as you said, youth wingers. Remember, I began with
Goon
Goon Squad. Yes, exactly. and you graduate, because that's often determined by your level of education and your general inclination towards demonstrating violence. Okay, and then you realize this doesn't work very well. Then you buy a suit, and that determines your behavior. You feel you can't go around throwing stones if you're wearing a suit.
Yep.
No.
Okay, so you limit yourself to just insults. Okay, then you realize even this insulting doesn't work very well. So you graduate slowly, but you see, people also know you. You also have a constituency of younger people who look up to you, and so you actually are a magnet for votes.
You're a community organizer.
Yes. So when something like an MCA's job comes along, goodness, you are in a pole position to actually get elected.
So what you're saying indirectly is that the 1,000 MCAs that we have, because of the association with the older politicians, they have basically just been molded by those older politicians.
Not all.
So that there's a likelihood that the behavior that we see in these youthful MCAs will mirror what we've seen with the older politicians.
Yes, it will. In fact, where I was taking my argument when I asked how does the organization that Nerima CEOs, how it sort of like meshes with the government, I have found that if you really want real influence, start with someone at the level of the education. You see, these things that we speak about, whether it's self-awareness, understanding nationhood, these things actually have to be taught. Forget singing the national anthem.
No.
No, it has to be part of your curriculum. So you grow up learning these things. If you assume that someone's just going to learn them along the way, you've missed it. They will not learn it along the way. The things they learn along the way are the things that are associative. Someone does something because someone else does it. But if they are taught in school, they internalize it.
It's ingrained.
Yes. And you can then relate what you learned to what you experience in life. We don't teach these things in our schools.
And what is what is the heartbeat? What is reverberating amongst young people today? And I'll ask that question against what is seen. A lot of it is that, young people are looking for, their way out, their way to, to be able to have, so that you don't be in a position whereby you're compromised because of your economic situation. To be in that position, to get some level of education, graduate, you start a business that's going to give you something. These things that we speak of that essentially would form a leader, would make a leader, nationhood, understanding governance and leadership and things like that. Do you, from where you sit, forget about what other people see, from where you sit and the people that you work with, do you see that young people actually have imbibed that feeling of saying, this is the Kenya, for example, that I want to fight for, that I want to eventually lead and govern? Because without that, then it would be very difficult to do things later with the kind of heart that you're talking about now.
And it will be almost impossible for them to have activities that are representative of something that would help the populace. What they're likely to do is to do what their mentors did and look after self.
So what do you see, Nerima?
What I see is, and which is why I even talked about educating, because as much as when we go to, say, a ward meeting with youth, and even we're talking about education and things like that, and our education system is terrible. And even there was a study last week, I think it was in the People Daily, that most young people, I think they studied Kilifi County, I'll have to check my phone, apparently with a class 8 education actually have a class 4 education, okay? So that I can say is the reality on the ground when I meet with youth. And that's why I even talked about Siasa not just being the politics of bantering between politicians, but the everyday understanding of access. And once you educate or you interact with people, young people, on their issues, and for many, it was just health, for instance. For young women, it was just, I just want a clinic that has medication in it and a doctor. That's it for me. Or access to water. And then linking that to services that are supposed to be your basic right, I do see a change. I do see a change. So I'm hopeful. But it's also, it comes from a space of limited information as well. Because here we are talking about these young people, I get the question whether young people really love this country. But even when you have those interactions with youth, a lot of them, what do they see? They see a state that is brutal toward young people. When we talk about even police brutality, a lot of those who are short or afraid of the police, walking in town after 6 p.m. is very scary for a young person, especially if you look like you're loitering. And just walking. People get arrested.
Let me ask,
Enough people have tried
how do you
to
need
help.
to walk to appear like you're loitering?
You get arrested.
No, what I'm asking is, what gait must I adopt? How must I
How
walk?
does this style of walking look?
Even
Yes.
That would
walking,
attract
the way you
the attention of
dress,
the
if you
police.
look like
Walking
an artist,
aimlessly
like me
without
looking like
intent.
this. Walking
So
aimlessly.
you now you look
Yeah.
like
But how
you're
do you walk
irresponsible
aimlessly?
and then you're not
Yes.
doing anything worth
Okay.
being on the
just
street.
walking.
How do you
the
walk
police
purposefully then? Let
office-
me ask that
No,
question.
and that's the thing.
starts
Police
from
will
how you
pull
dress.
you over. Yeah.
Oh, the whole
It's how you
judgment
dress.
is from how you
Meaning
dress.
it has nothing to do with
It's
walking.
profiling.
Yeah.
Yes, it has nothing to do with walking. It has nothing to do with the speed with which you're walking or the steps you're taking. It has to do with your youth,
Yep.
your demeanor. You
And
look
that's
young,
our country.
you've been profiled.
You look young, you look idle. You look
Yeah,
not
that's our
gainfully
country.
engaged.
and you look like a problem.
Yep.
Yeah. You do. And so when you come from that
What is it that
space-
this majority can do to engage better? If the youth are a majority in this country, that tells you that even in the police service, they're the majority. So this cuts across the board. So we can't really continue having this conversation about a majority complaining that the minority is suppressing them, and yet the majority has the opportunities.
Not only that, they are the majority even in employment.
Yes. So
I
in
didn't say
everything that we talk about,
Actually-
public service, no.
Actually, yes.
No.
I honestly see from where
No.
I'm looking at it, Nerima, I
Percentage-wise, no.
think
So
I
in public
think there's-
service, they're
there's
not-
a-
They
They're
are
not the
not.
majority.
That's one I'm sure.
all
Public
right.
service, they are not.
In
I'm sure.
other
Other
employment areas,
Yes.
they are.
Yes.
In the informal sector, in informal sector, youth are the majority.
Yes.
Okay. So what is it that the youth can then do
You know,
so that we can just change this paradigm?
Eric,
completely?
First of all, we
Eric,
can
I want,
stop by
I
saying-
want,
we
I want
can
us to
stop by
clarify
saying
this thing with
complaining.
Nerima. Public service involves not just people who work in so-called government offices, teachers, public service, police, public service, prison officers, public service, doctors in public service. Public service doesn't advertise and employ old people. The people who join the job market are usually young. So when they are employed, it may not appear so. If you talk about even employment in county governments, they may not be in positions of influence, but the largest number of people who are likely to be employed will be young. This is the point I'm trying to make.
Okay, then I was talking about public service in government. Statistically, 65% are above the age of 55. That is
60% are above the age of 55.
Can you
yes,
imagine?
yes,
Hey!
yes.
ridiculous.
That's
Something.
why government.
And
that's
this is the government that is now offering services to the
Yes,
majority of the
yes.
young
If,
people. There's a problem.
That is true.
if those statistics are true,
It is.
something is fundamentally wrong somewhere.
That's why government has tried initiatives to attract young people into the public service.
And what are some of these initiatives that you talk about?
There's the internship one where they had 3,000 youth to be interned at the public service.
Yeah.
But even that, the reporting was showing that they didn't transition well. Right now, they've also launched a new one where they're asking young people to apply. Again, it's a sort of a 1-year fellowship during this period. So they are trying to use different initiatives through the Public Service Commission.
And in your opinion, has this worked? And if it is not working, what's the reason why it wouldn't work? I'm getting to something here. Why is it not working?
The challenges, just a few. One is even the way government documents, still paperwork, still filing. Number
Youth are
two,
lazy not to.
huh?
Youth
Ati youth
too
are lazy.
Youth are too lazy to file paper.
We can document in other ways, actually, without utilizing too much storage
I
space.
see.
You see, this is how the person who's
It's not being
mentoring.
lazy.
This is, and I'm just saying, this is how
It's
the person,
progressing
the
with
person,
the times.
the
We
person
need to
who's
progress with
mentoring,
the
the person
times.
who's mentoring in public service,
When's
who's
he
about
using
55,
papers?
Looks at it like, wait.
looks at it like you are too lazy, so they just leave you alone at that point.
It's not
I told you to file
laziness.
papers.
Okay,
you told me,
We need new ideas.
Okay, let me ask you
We need
something.
new ideas.
Of course, yeah.
How do you consume your news? And how do many young people consume news?
On Twitter, a lot. On radio,
Bite size.
I
Ready
yeah,
to go.
but I do read the paper, but I'm not considered
You're an
a
outlier.
youth. Yes, I'm an outlier. But yes, for most young people, it will be social media.
Right.
Yes, and that's why we communicate a lot on
Essentially,
social media.
what you
Why
read
can't we
is
move there?
highly ultra summarized versions of what really happens.
It's little bits of information. It's morsels.
Yeah, but
right.
they come back and make the fool.
Eric, no. It doesn't work that way. Not really. Here we are. We discuss news every morning here.
Yes.
We don't just discuss the headline.
Yes.
Too
We
much
discuss
news.
the content. Now, I'm just going by Nerima's argument. It's too much information, man. Can you just sort of like...
Yeah,
Summarize
I'm
it
telling
and
you.
let's
That's
make
what
it-
people
make
tell
it
you.
into
It's too
bite
much.
That's it. That's
Yes,
it.
just-
Summarize it and let's go.
Time,
with it.
time.
Can we have this thing in 4 words, please?
Yeah.
And this is an entire article in 4 words.
Yeah.
No. What I'm trying to say is there are changes which I can understand because they are changes. But I cannot say that it is an extremely useful change. You know why? What you miss out on is profound. Because of wanting to introduce what you consider new and better, it is useful in terms of giving you a hint as to what you could understand so that you can be pushed to read more. But as the entity in and of itself,
Argument can be had.
no,
Back
shake your head.
arguments have
Do all
been
this
had with
extra
this.
for what?
Did you ever think that
Arguments
the
have been
Ministry
had.
of
Let's take a
Health
break.
would be
Let's
working with Facebook?
let's take
But
a quick break. We'll actually this is
no.
a different whole conversation altogether
No.
because our audience on KTN Home will be taking a quick break, so we want to take a quick break. But before we do that, let's talk about this portal by KPA that is an information portal. It's Captain Cargo, kpa.co.ke. .co.ke/Captain KARGO. Seti Muga is importing some PPEs into the country, and this is how we're helping him to understand the process of importing cargo. We had done from the very beginning. He was importing them from China. Steps 1, 2, 3, and 4 got the cargo onto the vessel. Next.
Right. So the shipping agent sends a form. I'm going to call it a form because the acronym is called anyway. It's this form that goes to KPA, and then the shipping agent sends a cargo manifest. So your shipping agent is doing all of these things for UCT, and then the manifest is approved and it's shared with the transit cargo partner. And then after that, it's distributed to KPA and partner government agencies such as KRA and other people where your costs need to then be paid. So that information comes through very easily. Your cargo's on the way. Not to worry. Ching, ching.
It's coming. So as we come to the conclusion of the hour, Nerima, let's just go back to the question that Ndu asked you. So government has been coming up with initiatives to attract the youth into public service, and some things are working, some are not working. What's not working?
What's not working is the fact that we are also transitioning. Therefore, the fact that we have now technology and understanding that we need to use new forms of documentation, and there's still the filing processes. We also had instances of young people feeling underutilized. You know, the way you can go for an internship and you're just being sent for tea and snacks.
That's what internship
You're not
does.
really learning. You're not learning anything. And so there's also that. And also the fact that there's a lack of understanding what these particular positions, their roles play. Because a lot of times when we think of government, again, we just think of politicians instantly. And so how can we show that there are careers in these spaces too, that young people can also apply toward? And I don't think it's just a Kenya program, a Kenya problem. Also, Ghana had the same issues, but at least there, through Emerging Leaders Foundation, other organizations, they are working and partnering and even looking toward coming here in Kenya. So I think there was also the issues of those who applied and not really knowing the criteria for those who received the internships. So there was a bit of a gap. Some were receiving a stipend every month, some were not. And that seems like an issue in our country, especially when it comes to the stipend that you're supposed to get. How come there are inconsistencies even when we talk about budget? So there was that too. And I think that they are trying to come in with a second phase to find better ways of engaging young people in these processes.
That's a lot to learn from a microwave generation that is coming in, and because you've been sent for cigarettes or tea, you feel like you've been underutilized, and tomorrow you don't want to come back.
so terrible.
Actually, when you
This is exactly
So
what happens in internship. You start
terrible.
from a certain point. If you come in and you expect that tomorrow you're going to be given an entire
That's not
documentation
the
to sign,
expectation.
what is
That's
the
not the
expectation? then?
expectation.
Tell me about the expectation. What do you
I've
expect?
been in an internship before where I have felt included or part of the process, especially when it comes to implementation of programs. Expecting to learn, even if it means being worked to the point where I am being thrown into the ocean to learn how to swim. But here we are. Actually, what we do is think that young people don't know how to do anything. So let's just put them there as a placeholder. And that's unfortunate because there's a lot of
We're going to
talent.
speak to somebody who has actually worked with the youth as well, just like you. And he was a former chairman of the Youth Enterprise Development Fund,